Hey everyone, it's Dr. Nightstare. Glad you're here. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Quick question before we start. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Alright, let's get settled. Get comfortable, let your body relax, and just take it easy. I was the last one in this empty town now. Every night, just as the last light faded, it came to my window. It was always there, a dark shape waiting outside the glass. It never made a sound, never moved much, just watched me with its still face. I talked to it anyway, telling it about the cold wind or the dust covering everything. Its constant watching was the only company I had. There was a strange comfort in its quiet presence, a steady point in the vast emptiness. Still, a cold feeling always settled deep in my stomach, knowing it would always be there. Its face was a network of sunken planes, stretched and pale, with eyes that seemed too large for their hollow sockets. The skin around its mouth pulled back in a permanent, chilling rictus. Sometimes it would twitch, a sudden jerk of its head or a tremor in its shoulder, making the distorted features ripple across the glass. I found myself watching it with a strange pity, a growing ache to reach out and offer some solace. It looked so utterly lost, so painfully alone, despite its unsettling form. My own limbs felt heavy, my mind a weary fog that never lifted. I pressed my palm against the cold pane where its face hovered, longing to make some kind of human contact, to bridge the distance. My fingers spread wide, desperate to feel something real against them, but the glass remained a solid barrier. A shiver ran through me as I considered my own matted hair and torn clothes. I had not looked in a mirror for many weeks, and knew I did not look much better than it did, trapped on my side of the glass. The sun began to bleed away, draining the last warmth from the broken world outside. I stood by the window, my eyes fixed on the empty space where it always appeared. The minutes stretched out into an agonizing crawl, each second heavier than the last, and the familiar shape did not materialize. My breath caught in my throat. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a deeper cold feeling than the night air could ever bring. It was not coming. It was truly not coming this night. This thought ripped through my mind, tearing at the frayed edges of my sanity. How could it not come? It was always there, always. I had nothing else, absolutely nothing left in this hollowed-out existence but its silent watch. My chest tightened. Each inhale became a strained effort, a rasping sound in the air that offered no other sound. I pressed my hands against the window pane, the cold glass mirroring the chill that had now taken root deep inside me. If it did not come, then there truly was no one. I was alone. I was completely alone. That truth solidified, cold and sharp, creating a terror that consumed everything. There was no one else. My frantic breath fobbed the glass. I smeared away the moisture. The murky shape solidified into its familiar outline. It was there, relief mixed with a tremor, my lips stretched in a quivering line. The face on the other side, its permanent rictus, performed a similar dreadful stretch. The eyes. I stared at the huge sunken eyes that looked so familiar, so deeply, horribly familiar. Its emaciated face was mine. The traumatized eyes, the thin matted hair, all mine. They reflected back from the pain. I was looking at myself. The air left my lungs. My stomach churned. I was truly alone, seeing my own decay, my madness, trapped behind the window. Devon had been my best friend for as long as I could remember, his steady presence a comfort in my life. He stood by me through everything, always listening and offering his quiet support. I trusted Devon completely, knowing he would never betray me. Yet, a hidden part of his loyalty went to my younger sister, Ashley, a truth that always stirred a complex unease inside me. He harbored a deep, long-standing affection for her, a devotion I saw in his eyes whenever Ashley entered a room. Ashley, my sister, possessed a striking beauty and a laugh that could fill any space, but her life carried the weight of a difficult past. Years ago, she struggled with drug use, and her then-boyfriend died from an overdose, an event that had scarred our family. Those memories remained vivid, casting a shadow over our present, even as Ashley tried to move forward. I loved Ashley fiercely, but her history made me protective, especially when it came to Devon. Devon saw only the potential in Ashley, the bright person beneath the struggles. He dismissed my quiet warnings, believing he could understand her complexities in a way others could not. I worried about his unwavering commitment to her, knowing Ashley's capacity for chaos, her tendency to pull people into her orbit only to leave them bruised. My affection for my sister was constant, but so was my apprehension about Devon's persistent longing for her. Their connection, while unacknowledged by Ashley, felt like a tightly wound spring ready to snap and create damage. The party filled my small apartment with the scent of cheap champagne and hopeful anticipation for the new year. Music vibrated through the floorboards, a cheerful, insistent rhythm I usually enjoyed. Tonight, a different tension gripped me. I watched Ashley across the room, her bright dress sparkling under the strung lights, a presence that drew every eye. Devon, as always, stayed close to her. Their proximity grew more pronounced as the night continued. I saw Ashley lean into Devon's space, her head tilted back in laughter as he spoke softly in her ear. Her hand rested on his arm for a moment too long, her fingers moved lightly on his sleeve. Devon's face, usually calm, showed a soft expression of absolute devotion whenever she looked at him, his gaze never leaving her. They danced together, moving together in a way that felt more intimate than two friends celebrating, their bodies swaying close. A knot tightened in my stomach with each casual touch, each shared smile. I found Devon by the kitchen counter refilling his drink. I waited for Ashley to move away, talking to someone else. "She is a complicated person, Devon," I said, keeping my voice low so the surrounding chatter would absorb it. "Her past is not something you can just ignore, no matter how much you care for her." He met my eyes, a gentle smile playing on his lips. I know all of it," he replied, his voice calm and reassuring. "I do understand her more than you think. I can handle her complexities." He reached out, briefly patting my arm, his touch warm. "Do not worry about me." His words did little to soothe my growing fear. I saw the intensity in his gaze whenever he looked at Ashley, an unyielding faith that made me uneasy. I saw the way Ashley, perhaps without intending it, drew him further in, feeding that devotion with every casual touch and laugh. The new year promised only a further unraveling of the delicate balance I tried to maintain. The escalating flirtation was clear, and my concern for Devon and what Ashley might do to him without intending it grew with every passing minute of the party. The party started to thin out, the music lowering itself to a dull murmur as people gathered their coats. Empty glasses stood on every surface, a testament to the night's revelry. I began collecting plates, the clinking sound echoing a bit too loudly in the emptying apartment. Ashley, giggling and swaying on her feet, stumbled past me, leaning heavily on Devon as they approached the door. Her words slurred together when she tried to thank me for the party. Devon held her steady, his arm a firm anchor around her waist. "I should get her home," Devon said, looking at me with a calm expression. "She is a little too gone to manage on her own." My stomach tightened. I hesitated for a moment, the usual warnings for Ashley flaring in my mind. She was so vulnerable when she drank too much, prone to bad decisions. But Devon was my best friend, steadfast and responsible. Who better to ensure her safety? I took a deep breath. "Just be careful with her," I told him, my voice holding more urgency than I intended. "She needs to get home safely." He nodded, a reassuring gesture. "I will." I watched them step out into the cool night, Devon guiding Ashley's unsteady steps towards his car. The orange glow of the streetlights caught their retreating figures for a moment before they disappeared from view. I heard the distant engine start, then fade away. The front door clicked shut, leaving me in the sudden quiet. I picked up a forgotten party popper, its string already pulled, and returned to cleaning up the remnants of the night. The uneasiness remained, a quiet presence beneath the surface of my determined tidying. I moved through the living room, gathering stray napkins and half-empty cans, the earlier uneasiness still. A quiet presence beneath the surface of my determined tidying. I stacked plates in the kitchen sink, the sound of porcelain clinking filling the otherwise empty space. The apartment felt too large now, too still after the boisterous celebration. I spotted a large picnic blanket draped over a chair that I had used to protect the sofa from spills earlier in the night. It needed to be folded and put away in the hallway closet. I walked towards the closet, its plain white door blending into the wall, a familiar feature I had opened countless times before. My hand reached for the cold metal doorknob, turning it with a simple twist. I tugged the handle, pulling the door open wide enough to slide the stack inside. But instead of the empty space I expected, a heavy, wet mass shifted within the darkness, losing its precarious balance. It tumbled forward without warning, spilling onto the polished floorboards with a sickening thud and a spray of dark fluid that splattered across the clean wood. My breath caught, my hands flying to my mouth as I stared at the twisted form before me, at the raw, glistening muscle beneath where skin should have been. The odor that now filled the apartment was a cloying, metallic stench, sour and sharp, instantly searing itself into my memory. The face, though stripped bare of its surface layers, was undeniably Devon's, the shape of his jaw, the remnants of his kind eyes staring blankly upwards towards the ceiling lights. The horror of it was an immediate, physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and freezing me to the spot. It was Devon, mutilated beyond recognition, yet still him. A cold dread, unlike anything I had ever known, seeped into my bones, chilling me to my core, because if Devon was here, dead and horribly disfigured inside my closet, then who had just left with Ashley in his car? The realization crashed down upon me with a force that made the room spin. The Devon who had offered to take my sister home, the Devon who had looked at me with reassuring calm only minutes ago, was not my best friend. He was an imposter, a monster wearing Devon's skin, and he had taken Ashley. My stomach lurched, the bitter taste of fear coating my tongue. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and desperate in the sudden, absolute terror. I sat in the bleachers, the chilled air bringing the shouts of the crowd and the sharp smack of pads from the field below. Jasper Ward broke free from the line, green and white flashing as he raced towards the end zone with the ball tucked tight against his arm. Everyone leaned forward, anticipating the touchdown, their breath held in the collective moment of hope and excitement. Then a wet, tearing sound exploded over the roar of the spectators, impossibly loud and sickeningly close. Jasper's body halted in mid-stride, his arm still instinctively reaching forward as a dark red spray erupted from his neck where his head had been just a moment before. For an instant, my mind tried to rationalize the sight, believing the gruesome fragments to be the ball, somehow bursting into thousands of pieces of red and bone. The chunks falling onto the grass were fragments of brain and skull scattering across the green turf. A strangled cry escaped my lips, lost among the sudden deafening shriek that rose from the stands and across the field. Parents pulled their children close while others scrambled over seats, tripping and falling in their desperate need to escape the horrifying truth revealed before us all. People surged forward and backward, a terrifying movement through the bleachers. The coach stood frozen on the sidelines, and his mouth hung open, staring at the mangled mess where a boy had stood only seconds ago. Months had passed since Jasper's death, but the field below remained a stark reminder of where horror had happened. We sat in the same bleachers, the air colder now, thinner. This game was for Jasper, a memorial, a difficult attempt at remembrance, though unease permeated everyone present. I watched the players, their movements stiff, their gazes serious, lacking the easy confidence they once possessed. 44 minutes ticked by on the large scoreboard. The game felt tense, joyless. Then Charlie Atlas, wearing Jasper's old number, caught a pass near the 50-yard line. He ran a powerful sprint down the sideline, driven by desperation, weaving past defenders with grim determination. The clock changed to 45 minutes exactly as he crossed the opponent's 20. A sound, wet and abrupt, ripped through the stadium. It was the sickening noise, unmistakable, terrifying. Charlie Atlas stumbled, his body still churning forward. Then a dark red eruption burst from his neck. His head, or what remained of it, exploded outward in a grotesque burst. Bits of bone, blood, and gray matter arced through the air, propelled by the blast's force. One large chunk, gruesome, unmistakably part of his skull, flew forward with the momentum of his sprint. It spun through the final yards and bounced just over the white goal line, marking a horrifying touchdown, its score impossible. The collective scream that tore from the stands was no longer just shock or grief. It was a roar of pure terror, louder and more desperate than the first time. People did not simply scramble, they stampeded, a panicked crush of bodies fighting to escape the stadium. The sickening pattern was clear, undeniable. This was a horror, methodical and repeating. Dread, cold and absolute, filled me and everyone else. A dreadful understanding settled on us all. This could happen to anyone, at any time, in this town, this world. A new fear spread through the air, a chilling understanding that a monstrous mechanism was at play, selecting its victims with horrifying precision. The screams from the field and the stands became a single piercing sound, reflecting a terror that had now settled, deep and irreversible, within our community. The air inside the church was cold, even with the press of bodies filling every pew. Charlie's closed casket stood before the altar, draped with a white cloth, a stark reminder of the horror. I sat a few rows back, my gaze fixed on the stained glass window depicting a serene angel, its colors muted by the overcast sky outside. Father Michael spoke solemn words about peace and remembrance, his voice resonating through the hushed congregation. A new wave of dread built inside me, tightening my chest, a terrible anticipation forming. Connor Hunt sat just 2 rows ahead, his shoulders hunched, his hands clasped tightly together. He always sat like that, a familiar gesture of false piety. The clock on the wall above the altar showed 45 minutes exactly. A wet, rending sound tore through the quiet church. It ripped apart the solemn atmosphere. A sound I now knew too well, a sound that always meant death. Connor's body lurched, his hands still clasped, and a dark red spray erupted from his neck. His head exploded outward, a sickening blossom of blood and bone, propelled with violent force. Large, jagged pieces of his skull and brain matter shot forward, impacting the stained glass window with shattering force. The angel's face fractured into a kaleidoscope of broken colored glass, raining down glittering fragments onto the pews and the screaming people below. A collective gasp, then a roar of pure, unadulterated terror filled the holy space, echoing off the high ceilings. People shrieked, scrambling over each other, overturning chairs, desperate to escape the new, impossible carnage. The smell of copper and something else, something metallic and burnt, filled my nostrils. I watched them scatter, the fear on their faces a mirror of the terror that had consumed the town. My gaze swept over the panic, and a quiet, cold satisfaction settled deep within me. I was the architect of this horror. Every moment, every eruption, every life taken was a precise act of will, a culmination of deep, resonant intent. Their transgressions, the boundaries they had crossed, the consent they had violated, those acts were my motivation. I saw their hidden cruelties, their quiet abuses, and I brought them to light in the most public, most undeniable way. They had broken trust and violated the sanctity of others, and now I made them pay. My eyes found Nathaniel sitting near the back, his face pale with terror as he watched the chaos. His eyes met mine for an instant, a flicker of something. Then his face contorted. A thin stream of dark red blood began to trickle from his left nostril, staining his upper lip. He lifted a trembling hand to touch it, his gaze still fixed on me, a new, terrible understanding dawning in his eyes. The church continued to erupt in screams and frantic movement around us. I stood at the corner, watching the pedestrian light cycle through its usual pattern. A breeze ruffled my jacket as I waited for the signal to change. My phone vibrated in my hand, pulling my attention away from the stream of passing hover vehicles. The screen displayed a critical notification from the central coherence system. The text filled the display. System notice. Inconsistent behavior detected. My stomach tightened with a sudden, unpleasant clench. I looked up. A woman had been standing beside me, quietly vocalizing a melody. She shifted her weight then. Her head turned, and she met my eye for a moment. Her smile vanished instantly. Her gaze flickered down to my phone screen, then returned quickly to my face. Her expression became blank. She took a distinct step away, widening the space between us on the pavement. The light changed, and people surged forward, but she paused, allowing me to move ahead before she followed, keeping her distance. The encounter left me feeling exposed and alone. The critical notification from the central coherence system had included a directive displaying the location of the nearest public support unit. I followed the indicated arrow on my screen, walking several blocks until I found one. It was a standard gray kiosk, boxy and unobtrusive, standing near the entrance of a transport hub, identical to countless others scattered throughout the city. Inside, a woman sat behind a transparent console screen. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, her uniform crisp. She did not look up immediately when I approached, continuing to tap at the interface before her. Citizen ID 733 Delta 9. Please confirm your presence, she stated, her voice even and without inflection, without lifting her eyes. I scanned my wrist tag against the pad. A green light flashed. Her fingers stilled. She finally looked at me, her gaze flat and assessing. Your recent activity has triggered a Level 2 coherence review, she began, her tone even. The system has logged several instances of inconsistent behavior. Her console screen shifted, displaying a scroll of concise entries. On 3 separate occasions, your pedestrian flow rate deviated from the calibrated standard for this sector. Your purchasing habits at registered vendors have shown minor fluctuations, suggesting an unplanned consumption profile. Additionally, an extended visual engagement with an unscheduled public event was recorded yesterday. Each point felt like an invasion. The system had flagged a trivial moment from my day. These are small things, I said, my voice sounding weak. She did not acknowledge my protest. Individually, these events are negligible. However, in aggregation they form a pattern. The central coherence system identifies this as a preliminary indicator of instability within your personal alignment parameters. All citizens must maintain a predictable and cohesive profile for optimal societal function. She paused, her eyes unwavering. Unstable patterns can lead to more significant system interventions. To restore your coherence and prevent further escalation, the system requires your consent to receive immediate alignment directives, she stated, her hand gesturing toward a small, illuminated depression on the console. A thumbprint icon glowed there. Place your thumb on the scanner to initiate the process. It is a simple recalibration. I looked at the glowing icon, then at her face. Her expression remained neutral, revealing nothing of what these directives might entail. My heart beat hard against my ribs. The system had meticulously logged my every deviation, no matter how small, and now it demanded access, demanding my agreement to unknown interventions. It felt like a trap. I felt my grip tighten on my leg. Allowing this felt like surrendering the last piece of myself. The thought of submitting to instructions I could not understand, from a system that had already judged my very existence as inconsistent, was unbearable. "What are these directives?" I asked, my voice a little rough. "What do they do?" She did not answer the question directly. "The directives are tailored to reestablish your optimal alignment. It is a personalized protocol." Her gaze held steady, patient. She offered no further explanation. The pressure to comply hung in the air, thick and heavy. A small red timer appeared in the corner of her screen, counting down from 60 seconds. It was a clear ultimatum. I considered the immediate consequences of refusal, the unknown penalties that would follow, but the alternative felt worse. Giving away my control to an opaque process felt like disappearing entirely. My hand, which had been inching toward the scanner, stopped. I pulled it back. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I will not consent to unknown directives." The agent's head tilted slightly. Her eyes registered my refusal without a flicker of surprise or emotion. She tapped a series of commands on her console. The soft glow of the thumbprint scanner immediately vanished. Her screen changed, displaying new text. Simultaneously, my phone vibrated again. I pulled it out of my pocket. The central coherence system notification had replaced everything else on the display. It showed two stark, unblinking lines of text: observation mode active and mobility restrictions aptly. The words filled the screen with a chilling finality. "Your decision is logged," the agent stated. "The central coherence system reclassifies your status. This categorization is permanent. Penalties for unaligned individuals commence immediately. Non-compliance leads to severe interventions." Her eyes held my gaze. I turned from the console. The unit's door hissed open, letting in city light. I stepped onto the bustling pavement. People moved. A man slowed, pointing at my phone. His face twisted with disgust. He pulled his child closer. Other glances shifted to aversion. A woman stopped. Eyes narrowed. She quickly rerouted, making a wide arc around me. Judgment pressed against me. My phone vibrated. A new map overlaid city streets. Several routes were grayed out. My direct path home was gone. A winding sequence of turns glowed green, indicating my permissible way. I tried to step onto a plaza, but my phone pulsed. A red X appeared over the disallowed area. A persistent tone sounded. I was forced to follow the green line. The system had marked me. My freedom was now a memory, replaced by invisible restraints. The world had turned against me. I was unaligned. Every step felt like a concession, every glance a condemnation. I gazed upon the three women kneeling before me, their faces upturned, awaiting my word. This was the first night of their path, the initial step towards ultimate salvation. My hand moved with precise intent, a silver knife tracing the ancient symbols onto their skin, each cut a necessary release. Blood welled bright on their skin, and I carefully collected it in a shallow bowl, a vital offering for their new beginning. I chanted the sacred verses, the words vibrating through the small room, guiding their spirits toward eternity. Each incision, each drop, brought them closer to transcendence, a painful but essential process for their awakening. They looked exhausted, their eyes losing focus, but I knew this was just their physical form succumbing, preparing for the true transformation that would unfold over these 3 blessed nights. Many times before, the path had seemed to falter, a challenging setback. Each time, I carried the still forms to the cellar below, preparing their temporary resting places. I laid them with care in the earth, knowing their bodies were merely cocoons, undergoing a metamorphosis. My heart ached then, not for their breathing lives, but for my own perceived shortcomings, for the delay in their full emergence. I knew the fault lay with the world's resistance, not with my consistent purpose. 41 times I had performed these rites, and now, with these 3 women, I approached the 3rd morning of my 42nd promise. The 3rd morning arrived, gray light seeping through the high window, illuminating the exhausted faces of my 3 new charges. I had completed the final inscriptions, whispered the last incantations, and waited for their transformation. The house began to tremble then, a deep vibration rising from the very earth. The floorboards shifted beneath my feet, and the walls groaned around us. Guttural whispers started, not from my women, but from everywhere, filling the air. They grew, intensifying, coalescing into a terrifying roar that shook the very foundations, a mighty voice uttering the exact words I had spoken over them, words of ultimate release and eternity. This was it, the moment I had anticipated for so long, the true awakening. My own heart swelled with triumph, a culmination of all my struggles and devotion. The veil had finally lifted. My followers were not merely entering their cocoons, they were emerging, finally embracing their destiny. I watched their still forms, knowing their transcendence was now complete, unaware of any different meaning this manifestation might hold, even as it shook the very earth around us, confident in the power of my chosen path. The missing persons reports had accumulated, each detail pointing us to this secluded house on the edge of the forest. We served the warrant, then breached the heavily fortified front door. An unsettling quiet greeted us inside, though a pervasive, indistinct murmur seemed to drift from within the walls, never forming words we could grasp. We moved slowly through the cluttered rooms until a loose rug caught my eye, concealing a trapdoor in the living room floor. Below it, a hidden cellar opened into darkness. We found an altar constructed from rough-hewn stone in that cold, damp space, and beyond it, another open trapdoor led deeper into the earth. The man we sought was gone, as were all the women he had taken. Instead, nearly 100 bare, blood-blackened footprints covered the dirt floor of the cellar. Those countless prints emerged from the deeper opening, spreading across the cellar, then through the main house, and out the rear door into the surrounding woods, vanishing among the dry leaves and undergrowth. We stood there, our flashlights cutting through the gloom, confronting the terrifying implication of a collective departure, a silent, bloody procession swallowed by the forest. The weeks blurred into an indistinguishable stretch of days, trapping us all within the decaying walls of the desolate motel. Our small store of water bottles upon the chipped dresser stood nearly empty now. Each small gulp of water became a conscious decision, bringing a relief that was brief and bitter. The last canned peaches had disappeared days ago into hungry mouths, leaving only the memory of their syrupy sweetness. David and I had walked for miles across the scorched asphalt under the burning sky, shouting for any sign of life, but we always returned to the motel alone with nothing to offer. Thirst made our throats feel rough and tight, making every word a struggle, every breath dry. Hunger filled our thoughts with a persistent ache, gnawing away at our reason. We no longer spoke of rescue or the outside world, instead communicating in commands that were short and sharp. Our voices sounded raspy and hoarse. David stared at the others with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His eyes were bright and focused. Our own eyes lingered on each other, assessing, calculating. A silent question passed between us. The fragile peace that once held us together had long dissolved, replaced by a desperation that was raw and growing, tightening its grip around us all, eroding our common decency. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the gritty floor. A shift happened in the room, a subtle change in the air, a movement of David toward the group of others. He spoke quietly, his words not meant for my ears but for theirs, yet I caught the sound of Allison's name. My chest tightened as their faces, drawn and gaunt, turned toward the elderly woman. Allison sat slumped against the wall, her breath shallow, her eyes closed, unaware of the quiet conversation unfolding around her. Then David turned, his eyes finding mine, and he conveyed the decision without speaking another word. A cold wave washed over me as the meaning became clear in his empty gaze. They would take Allison. Not just her food, not her share of water, but her blood. The thought clawed at my throat, a scream trapped behind clenched teeth. No. I finally managed to croak, the word rough and raw from my dry throat. We cannot do this. My voice sounded loud in the confined space, a desperate plea hanging in the oppressive air. The others looked at me, their eyes glassy and distant, holding no trace of recognition or warmth. There was no anger, no defense, just a profound emptiness that mirrored my own growing despair. They did not respond. They did not even blink. Their gazes did not waver. They only stared through me as if I were already gone. My protest hung useless between us, unheard and unacknowledged. I took a slow step back, then another, the horrifying reality settling around me like a shroud. My voice died in my throat, swallowed by the unspeakable act they had already decided. I retreated to a dark corner, my back pressing against the cold wall, my eyes fixed on Allison, unable to look away from her still form. I stayed pressed against the cold wall. I heard movement from their corner, a soft shuffle, then a quiet scraping sound against the floor. A stifling silence followed. David emerged from the shadows, his face flat and hard, his eyes without any life. He looked directly at me. A strong metallic smell filled the air, acrid and unmistakable. It permeated everything around us. My stomach twisted with nausea. I understood what they had done. David lifted a hand to his lips, his fingers stained dark, and then he simply sat down, turning his back on the space where Allison had been. The new day brought no relief. The others stirred from their restless sleep. They swallowed the few drops of water left in their bottles. Their gazes drifted around the small room, searching, assessing. They fixed on me, their eyes sharp with a renewed hunger. It was a hunger not for the last few drops, but for something more substantial. Their stares lingered on my arms, then on my throat, then my legs. My larger size was not a comfort now. The unspoken message was clear. I was the next one. The baby monitor crackled, pulling me from a deep sleep. Michael's voice, rough with panic, sliced through the quiet room. "April, he's in here. Get out of the house now. Take Lily, run." My heart hammered against my ribs, but before I could even sit up, the bedroom door opened. Michael stood there, a wry smile playing on his lips, holding a mug of coffee. "Got you," he said, his voice completely normal, not the panicked yell I had just heard. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by irritation. I was about to scold him for such a cruel prank when his face tightened. From the monitor on the nightstand, Michael's panicked voice came again, clear as a bell. "April, I'm not kidding. He's here. Get Lily out now." My husband stared at the monitor, his coffee mug slowly lowering from his mouth, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. The Michael in our bedroom, the one holding the coffee, dropped his mug. It shattered on the floor, its sharp sound lost beneath the monitor's renewed pleas. "He's in Lily's room. Get her out. Please, April." Michael grabbed my hand, pulling me from the bed, and we stumbled towards the nursery door. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm as we burst inside, scanning the room for any sign of an intruder. Lily lay asleep in her crib, untouched. Then a new voice, identical to Michael's, came from the open doorway behind us. "April, thank God you're safe." I heard him in here. I spun around, my breath catching. Standing there, identical, was Michael. Two Michaels. One behind us, one beside me, both looking at me with the same fear, both claiming to be my husband. I gripped Lily tighter, her small body pressed against mine, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted between the two men, identical down to the worried crease in their brows and the faint stubble on their jaws. One of them had to be a lie. My mind screamed at the impossible sight. The Michael who had just dropped the coffee mug, the one by my side, reached out a trembling hand towards me. "April, it's me," he whispered, his voice raw with terror. "Don't listen to him. He's not real." The other Michael, standing in the doorway, took a deliberate step into the nursery, his eyes locking onto mine with a desperate intensity. "He's the imposter, April. He wants to hurt Lily. You know I would never let anything happen to our daughter." He pointed to a small, locked gun case above the changing table. "The gun, April. Get it. You have to protect her." My heart hammered against my ribs, demanding a choice. How could I tell them apart? They looked, sounded, felt identical. I knew my husband. I had spent years loving him, living with him, building a life. Yet now, facing two of him, every memory blurred into confusion. The Michael by the door's gaze hardened. "You know me, April," he pressed, his voice firm, unwavering. "You know who your husband is. Shoot him. Prove your trust. Show me you know the real me." He was commanding, demanding action, a trait I knew from Michael when he was under extreme stress, when he had to take charge. The Michael by my side stood frozen, tears beginning to well in his eyes, tracking wet paths down his cheeks. He simply stared at me, his mouth open slightly. No words coming out, only a silent plea in his gaze. My Michael was a man of action, of defiance. He always fought, always protected his family, always faced danger head-on. He would never stand there crying, broken and silent when Lily was threatened. That silent, tearful pleading was not my Michael. The demanding voice, the insistence on trust that felt like him, felt like my husband. My hand, still shaking, reached for the cold metal of the pistol from the case. Lily whimpered softly against my chest, a tiny sound of distress that spurred me forward. I raised the gun, my arm steadying with a sickening resolve. My eyes, brimming with tears of my own, met the pleading, wet gaze of the silent Michael. I pulled the trigger. The earth felt cold and unforgiving beneath my worn boots, a stark contrast to the ache in my chest. We buried him, the other Michael, in the farthest corner of the property, beneath the old oak tree where Lily loved to play. It felt wrong, monstrous, but there was no other way. My hands still trembled from the weight of the shovel, but more so from the impossible choice I had made. Michael, my Michael, the one I had saved, stood beside me, his arm a solid presence around my waist. He had been strong, unwavering, just as I knew he would be. Later, inside, the house felt too large, too quiet without the frantic whispers of terror. Lily was asleep, safe in her crib, a miracle I still could not quite grasp. Michael had made me a cup of tea, warm and soothing, though the steam did nothing to thaw the deep coldness I felt. We sat on the living room couch, the dying light of day painting long shadows across the walls. He pulled me close, resting my head on his shoulder, his fingers gently tracing patterns on my arm. The comforting gesture felt like a balm, a promise of peace after the nightmare. "It's over now, April," he murmured, his voice soft against my hair. "That thing, it's gone. We'll forget about it. Erase it from our minds." I nodded, unable to speak. The words stuck somewhere in my throat, tangled with a grief that had no clear object. I was safe. Lily was safe. That was all that mattered. He tightened his arm around me, a sigh escaping his lips. It was unsettling how identical he was, wasn't it? Even the way he looked at you, with that desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He almost had you, didn't he? Made you doubt. My body stiffened, a chill creeping through me that had nothing to do with the fading light. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, pushing myself back slightly to look at him. A small, knowing smile played on his lips, a look I had never seen before, a subtle shift that sent a jolt of alarm through me. He chuckled softly, a low sound that disturbed my thoughts. "Oh, April, you always did have a soft spot for his more emotional moments, didn't you?" He truly thought if he just stood there, all tearful and silent, you'd know it was him. Foolish. He never understood that you needed strength, needed someone to fight for you. He thought his vulnerability would sway you. The room spun. My breath caught, my heart seizing in my chest. More emotional moments. Thought his vulnerability would sway you. The words echoed, distorting, twisting everything I thought I knew. My Michael, the real Michael, but the silent, tearful one. The one I shot had been pleading. And this Michael, the one beside me, the one I saved, had just spoken about the other's emotional vulnerability with a detached, knowing contempt. He knew the real Michael's emotional moments. He knew his silent desperation. He knew, and he used it. The demanding voice, the insistence on trust, that it felt like my husband. But it was a cruel imitation, a performance. The Michael who wept, who silently pleaded with his eyes, was the one who genuinely loved me, who knew he didn't need words to convey his truth. I had chosen the wrong one. I had killed my husband. The Jeep rattled over the last stretch of gravel, its engine finally settling into a contented purr as I cut the ignition. A long silence followed, vast and open. I sat for a moment, letting the stillness seep into my bones, a welcome counterpoint to the city I had left behind. The journey had been a deliberate descent into remoteness, a shedding of crowded streets and insistent demands. Now, only the mountains stood around me, its massive slopes rising on every side, cradling this wide meadow. This place was exactly as I had pictured, a vast expanse of pale green grass studded with a few scattered pines, framed by the dark reaching forest. I opened the door and stepped out, breathing in air that felt clean and cold, carrying the faint scent of pine needles and damp earth. The sun, a warm, bright orb, still hung high above the western ridge, but its light was softening, stretching long shadows across the grass. I stretched my arms above my head, feeling the pleasant ache in my shoulders, then started unpacking. The tent came first, a simple dome, easy to erect. I unfolded it carefully, laying the fabric flat on a patch of ground that seemed level and clear. each stake pushed into the earth with a satisfying crunch. The sleeping bag unrolled inside, a thick layer of warmth. My small cook stove, a sturdy pot, and a bag of trail mix joined it. I organized my gear with methodical precision, finding comfort in the routine. This was my ritual, my escape. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple, I built a small fire. The crackle of burning twigs was a friendly sound in the encroaching quiet. I watched the flames dance, a small island of warmth in the deepening twilight. The air grew cooler with each passing minute, and I pulled my jacket tighter. Dinner was a simple affair. Instant noodles warmed over the fire, eaten slowly, savored. The stars began to appear, one by one, pinpricks of light against the growing dark. The night sky here was a spectacular view, a glittering canopy I rarely saw. I stayed by the fire until the last embers faded, content in the quiet vastness. Finally, I crawled into the tent, zipping the flap closed. The thin nylon walls offered a fragile boundary between me and the immense world outside. I settled into my sleeping bag, pulling it up around my chin. The sounds of the night began to filter through the fabric, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional chirp of a cricket. These were the familiar sounds of the wild, comforting in their regularity. I closed my eyes, ready for sleep, a deep, restorative sleep. Then it started. It was not a sound I could immediately place. A soft exhalation, a slow intake of air, like a breath. It was close, too close. My eyes snapped open. I held my own breath, listening intently, my heart beginning a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. The rhythmic sound came again, a deep, measured breath that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. It was coming from outside the tent, just beyond the thin barrier of fabric. It was not the shallow panting of a deer, nor the rough snorting of a bear. This breath was different, a deliberate expansion and contraction, lacking the ragged edge of an animal's natural rhythm. I lay perfectly still, my muscles tensed, straining to hear over the sudden rush of blood in my ears. The breathing continued, steady and slow, moving slightly from left to right, as if whatever was making the sound was slowly circling the tent. Each inhale and exhale seemed to draw closer, the faint movement of air almost perceptible against the tent wall. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation. A large animal, perhaps, curious about the strange fabric structure in its territory. But the quality of the sound, its unnerving regularity, resisted easy categorization. It felt too purposeful. A new sensation pricked at my nerves. A soft brush against the tent fabric, a tentative touch, like a feather dragged across the nylon. It was too light to be a branch, too deliberate to be accidental. The touch moved, exploring the surface of the tent wall, a slow, methodical sweep. I imagined a hand, a massive, unseen palm, tracing the contours of my temporary shelter. The breathing stopped then, replaced by this gentle, probing exploration. It was worse. The sound had been unsettling, but this physical interaction was terrifying. My skin prickled with a cold dread. Then, a small, distinct sound. A metallic scrape, barely audible, but unmistakable. It was the zipper, the main entry zipper to the tent. A tentative tug. Just a small, almost imperceptible pull, then a release. A second tug followed, a little firmer this time, and I could hear the faint whisper of the zipper teeth trying to separate. My breath hitched in my throat. This was not an animal. An animal would paw, sniff, push. This was an attempt to open the tent. A calculated action. My body locked up. I could not move, could not speak, could not even scream. All I could do was listen, every nerve-ending screaming with terror. The gentle tugs continued, persistent, probing. It seemed to be testing the zipper, learning its mechanism. I stared at the dark fabric of the tent door, imagining an eye on the other side, an unknown gaze fixed on my cowering form. The air inside the tent felt cold, suddenly devoid of oxygen. I knew without seeing that something was out there, something with intelligence, something that wanted to get in. The tugs became more insistent, stronger. The zipper groaned under the strain, the metal teeth rasping against each other, threatening to give way. I could hear a subtle stretching of the fabric around the zipper line. Panic began to claw at my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could disappear, willing whatever was outside to simply leave. But it did not leave. It kept pulling, a methodical, relentless effort. The only sound in the entire world was that zipper, a tiny, fragile barrier against an encroaching horror. I opened my eyes again, wide and unblinking, fixed on the dark outline of the zipper, expecting it to split open at any second, to reveal whatever nightmare waited on the other side. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, echoing the terrifying tugs at the zipper. I knew then that the solitude I had sought had transformed into a cage, and I was not alone in it. The dark world outside was alive, aware, and it was watching. The first sliver of dawn pierced the tent fabric, a pale, indifferent light. The tugging on the zipper had stopped hours ago, at some point lost in the interminable night. I had not slept. My eyes remained wide open, fixed on the dark material of the tent door, straining against the absolute blackness that had enveloped me. Each breath I took felt shallow, stolen. The silence that now permeated the tent was not restful. It was heavy, pregnant with memory of the relentless pulls, the rasping metal, the deliberate intent of whatever had lurked just inches from my face. My body ached with tension, every muscle locked, prepared for an assault that had never fully materialized. When the light grew strong enough to distinguish the faded green of the tent walls, I slowly, cautiously, pushed myself into a sitting position. My limbs protested, stiff and cold. The world outside remained quiet, deceptively so. No sound of footsteps moving away, no rustle of departure. Just an unnerving stillness. I knew I had to get out. I could not stay in that thin fabric shell, haunted by the memory of the previous night. Fear coiled in my stomach, a cold, hard knot. My hand trembled as I reached for the zipper, the very one that had been tested and probed for hours. I pulled it down with slow, deliberate care, fearing what I might find waiting on the other side. The metal teeth separated with a soft hiss. I braced myself, then pushed the flap open, peering out. The meadow was bathed in the cool light of early morning. Dew sparkled on the grass, reflecting the soft blue of the sky. The air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of pine. Everything appeared normal, pristine, undisturbed. A wave of intense, dizzying relief washed over me, almost making me weak with its sudden force. It had been an animal, after all. A persistent one, perhaps, but just an animal. My mind, desperate for a rational explanation, clung to the thought. I crawled out of the tent, rising slowly, still scanning the perimeter. The jeep sat patiently where I had parked it. The trees stood tall and still. No sign of anything out of place. I took a deep, shaky breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. My gaze then drifted down to the ground immediately surrounding my tent. The relief evaporated, replaced by a fresh, chilling wave of dread that swept through my entire body. I stood frozen, staring at the grass. Around the entire circumference of my tent, a perfect circle had been flattened into the earth. The grass blades were pressed down with unnatural precision, forming a dark, distinct ring against the dew-kissed green. It was not a haphazard trampling. This was a deliberate, unbroken line, as if something enormous and perfectly round had been placed down and then lifted, or as if something had moved with methodical, unvarying pressure, tracing the outline of my shelter with impossible accuracy. There were no paw prints, no hoof marks, no scuff marks from a branch, just the flattened grass, forming a circle so flawless it seemed etched into the meadow itself. My breath caught in my throat. This was not an animal. No natural creature could have created such a precise, unwavering mark. The implication struck me with the force of a physical blow. Whatever had been outside my tent, breathing and tugging at the zipper, possessed intelligence, an unnatural precision, and a presence capable of leaving such a profound, yet subtle, signature. It had marked its territory, or perhaps it had marked me. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I needed to leave, immediately. Every instinct screamed at me to abandon everything and run, but the logical part of my brain knew I needed the jeep. I moved with a desperate, clumsy haste, tearing down the tent, stuffing it into its bag without care. The sleeping bag was shoved in, the cook stove tossed into the duffel. My movements were jerky, driven by a primal urge to flee. I did not bother with breakfast, did not even think of packing away the small amount of trash. Everything that could be abandoned was. The only thing that mattered was getting back to the jeep, getting out of this place. I slung my backpack over one shoulder, the weight of it feeling like an anchor, but I ignored it. My eyes darted constantly around the meadow, into the dark edges of the forest, searching for any movement, any indication that the thing was still nearby. The woods, which had seemed so inviting yesterday, now loomed dark and menacing. It was a dense wall of green and brown, concealing whatever horror had left its signature around my tent. My feet moved swiftly, almost at a run, across the dew-soaked grass towards the trail leading back to the jeep. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of terror through me. The air itself seemed to hum with a presence, a watchful, patient awareness. I gripped the straps of my backpack, knuckles white. The open meadow offered no cover, no comfort. I needed the perceived safety of the trail, the known path that would lead me back to civilization. The forest swallowed me whole as I plunged into the tree line. The light immediately dimmed, filtered through the thick canopy of leaves. The sounds of the open meadow vanished, replaced by the closer, more intimate sounds of the woods, the chirping of unseen birds, the buzz of insects, the whisper of wind through the pines. But beneath these natural sounds, I detected something else, something subtle and deeply unsettling. It began as a feeling, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the distinct impression of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, but saw nothing but trees, their trunks blurring into an indistinguishable wall. I sped up, my boots crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quiet of the woods. Then, I heard it, a soft snap distinct from the random falling of twigs from somewhere deep in the undergrowth to my left. It was not directly behind me, nor directly in front. It was parallel, as if something was moving through the dense woods at the same pace as me, just out of sight. I paused, holding my breath, straining my ears. The woods fell silent, except for my own ragged breathing. I waited, listening. Nothing. I started walking again, faster this time, trying to convince myself it was just an animal, startled by my sudden halt. But the feeling of being accompanied persisted, stronger now. It was a tangible presence, a pressure in the air, a coldness that seemed to emanate from the trees to my left. I dared another glance. Still nothing. Just the endless dark trunks and the thick, concealing foliage. A branch scraped against a tree trunk, a long, drawn-out sound, not the natural creak of old wood. It seemed to come from precisely the direction I was trying to ignore. I broke into a desperate jog, my legs burning with effort. The trail was uneven, covered with roots and stones, making it difficult to maintain speed, but I pushed through the pain, driven by the terror nipping at my heels. As I ran, I heard it again. A series of rustles, a deliberate push through undergrowth, keeping perfect pace with me. It was too regular, too intentional to be a deer or a squirrel. Whatever it was large, and it was moving with purpose, tracking me through the dense wilderness. The sound was always just beyond the visual reach of the trees, a maddening, invisible pursuit. I veered right, stumbling over a root, trying to put more distance between myself and the unseen parallel movement. The sounds from the left simply adjusted, maintaining their relentless pace. It was a hunter, and I was the prey. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning. The trail ahead twisted and turned, ascending a small rise. I focused on the ground directly in front of me, forcing myself forward, trying to ignore the constant, unnerving sounds from the left. Each step became a frantic prayer for the jeep to materialize. The woods felt like an endless, suffocating tunnel. Then the path abruptly ended. A massive tree trunk lay squarely across the trail, completely blocking my way. It was an old log, thick and heavy, covered in moss, clearly ancient, but it had not been there when I came up the day before. My mind reeled, trying to comprehend what I saw. I had memorized the trail. This section had been clear. I approached cautiously, my heart sinking with a terrible certainty. This was not a natural fallen tree. The ground around the log was disturbed, not by the impact of a falling trunk, but by dragging. A clear furrow was scraped into the earth, leading from the dense undergrowth to the right, where the log must have been moved from. Smaller branches and twigs were snapped and crushed along this track, a trail of destruction leading to the current blockade. The sheer size of the log was staggering. No single human could have moved it. It would require heavy machinery or something with immense unnatural strength. The realization hit me like a physical blow, colder and more terrifying than anything I had experienced so far. The thing that had been outside my tent, the thing that was now paralleling my path, had anticipated my route. It had deliberately, intentionally, moved this colossal barrier into my way. It was not just tracking me, it was actively hurting me, manipulating my escape. It was playing a game. Despair threatened to overwhelm me. My legs felt like lead. I stood there, staring at the impassable log, the weight of the entity's malevolent intelligence pressing down on me. I was trapped. The fear became a desperate, choking terror. I scrambled to the right, attempting to find a way around the huge obstruction. The undergrowth was incredibly thick here, a tangled mess of thorny bushes and low-hanging branches that clawed at my clothes and skin. I pushed through, heedless of the scrapes and tears, my movements frantic and clumsy. The branches whipped back, stinging my face and arms. I could hear the distinct sound of something moving rapidly through the parallel undergrowth again, matching my sudden detour. It was waiting, watching my efforts. After what felt like an eternity, I found a way around the log, a narrow, miserable crawl through dense foliage that left me scratched and bleeding, my clothing snagged and torn. I stumbled back onto the main trail, gasping for air, my throat raw. My eyes scanned the woods, searching for any glimpse of my tormentor, but the trees remained a solid, impenetrable wall. The parallel movement continued, relentless, a constant, sickening reminder that I was not alone, that my every desperate step was observed, matched. The jeep felt impossibly far away, a distant dream. The woods had become a living, breathing labyrinth, and I was lost within its deadly game, pursued by an unseen, intelligent hunter that could move mountains or at least monumental logs. I ran, my only thought survival, my only destination. the distant, uncertain promise of escape. I burst out of the tree line, stumbling onto the gravel of the parking lot. My lungs screamed for air. My legs burned with an agonizing ache. But I did not stop. I pushed through the pain, my gaze fixed on the familiar shape of the Jeep. It sat there, a beacon of hope, sunlight glinting off its windshield. I was almost there. I could practically feel the rough texture of its steering wheel under my hands. The parallel pursuit had stopped the moment I cleared the trees, leaving an oppressive quiet in its wake. My heart still hammered, but a desperate surge of relief began to spread through my chest. I had made it out of the woods. I fumbled with the Jeep's door handle, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The latch clicked, and I yanked the door open, practically falling inside. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the stillness, and immediately locked it. My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the ignition, twisting it with a frantic urgency. The engine roared to life, a beautiful sound of mechanical power and impending escape. I shifted into reverse, pressing down on the accelerator, eager to put distance between myself and that terrifying place. Just as the Jeep began to roll backward, a sudden impact jolted the entire vehicle. A heavy thud struck the passenger side door, making the metal groan inward. My head snapped around. Something was pressing against the Jeep, a vast, dark mass clinging to the side. It was not solid, not truly defined, but a shifting expanse of what seemed like pure shadow, intensely black and formless, that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It had no discernible shape, only an immense density that seemed to flow and ripple as it held fast to the Jeep. Fear, cold and absolute, paralyzed me for a single agonizing moment. This was it. This was the entity. It had followed me, waited for me. It had breached the final barrier. I pressed the accelerator harder, the tires spitting gravel, but the Jeep shuddered under the immense resisting weight. It felt as if an invisible, powerful anchor held me in place. Then, a part of the shifting mass began to ooze over the edge of the passenger side window, slipping through the barely open crack at the top. It elongated, a dark tendril reaching into the Jeep's interior. I cried out, a raw, involuntary sound, and instinctively slammed the window button. The glass whirred, attempting to rise, but the flowing mass expanded, resisting the upward pressure. It began to force the window down instead, a horrifying display of unnatural strength. I panicked, grabbing at the dark substance with my hands. It felt like nothing, yet it was undeniably there, cold and dense, like plunging my hands into a pool of icy, thick oil. My fingers found no purchase, no solid form to grasp. The tendril continued to force its way in, widening the gap, pushing the window down even further. I could feel its strange, chill presence now filling the interior of the Jeep, a suffocating coldness that radiated from the dark mass. It was then that I saw it, or rather, felt it. As the main mass outside continued to press against the Jeep and the tendril worked the window, a second, more compact section of the amorphous entity suddenly coalesced directly in front of my face. It was still dark, still shifting, but it condensed into a more focused point of incredible density. It was not an eye, but I felt an intense, focused gaze, a malevolent intent radiating from its center, a silent, piercing awareness. This thing was not just an animal or a force of nature. It was intelligent, conscious, and it was here for me. My mind screamed. I pulled my hand away from the window, desperate to fight back. I had to get away. I glanced wildly around the Jeep's interior, my eyes landing on the heavy-duty flashlight I kept under the seat. With a desperate lunge, I grabbed it, the cold metal a welcome weight in my hand. I swung the flashlight with all my strength, aiming for the concentrated mass hovering before my face. The heavy end connected with a wet, yielding impact. There was no resistance, no solid crunch, just a sickening squelch as the flashlight seemed to sink into the dark substance, a cold wave of something that felt like intense pain, or perhaps pure shock, reverberated back through my arm. The mass recoiled, pulling back from my face, a small section of its shadowy form dissipating with a quick, unnatural shudder. It seemed to shriek then, but it was not a sound I heard with my ears. It was a piercing, internal shriek that clawed at my mind, a scream of pure, chilling agony that felt like shattered glass within my skull. The Jeep lurched violently as the entity, momentarily stunned, loosened its grip. This was my chance. I jammed the gear shift into drive, stomping on the accelerator. The tires squealed, fighting for traction, and the Jeep shot forward. The massive, dark presence was torn from the side of the vehicle with a final, sickening ripping sound, leaving behind a cold, viscous residue on the passenger door that quickly faded into nothingness. I did not look back. I drove, the engine screaming as I pushed it to its limits. The gravel road blurred, then gave way to the uneven dirt track, and finally, the familiar asphalt of the main highway. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white and aching. My entire body trembled uncontrollably. The shriek still echoed in my mind, a phantom pain that resonated deep within my bones. I was free, physically, but the horror clung to me. A parasitic dread burrowed deep into my being. The drive home was a blur of frantic speed and overwhelming paranoia. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see that dark, shifting mass materializing behind me. Every shadow seemed to coalesce. Every distant object on the road seemed to change shape. My heart continued its frantic rhythm, a constant reminder of the physical encounter, the cold, impossible touch, the mental scream. I drove until the sun began to set, the familiar sprawl of the city rising on the horizon, a welcome sight that promised safety and anonymity. I pulled into the parking garage of my apartment building, the familiar concrete walls and artificial lights offering a strange, fragile comfort. I parked the Jeep in my usual spot, then sat there for a long time, the engine off, the silence inside the vehicle jarring after the roaring escape. I needed to convince myself I was safe, that it was over. My gaze fell upon the passenger side door, where the entity had clung. I examined it closely, my breath catching in my throat. There, pressed into the gritty dust that coated the Jeep's exterior, was a mark. It was not a perfect impression, but a strange, distorted imprint. It had 5 distinct points, like fingers, but they were long, attenuated, and ended in blunt, rounded tips. The palm area was wide, almost disproportionately so, and the entire print was smeared and elongated, as if whatever had made it possessed a flexible, yielding form that had been forcefully dragged. It was far too large for a human hand, and utterly wrong in its proportions, a disturbing testament to the creature's alien physiology. The physical proof of its touch, its violation, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, trying to calm my ragged breathing. It was over. I had escaped. I would scrub the Jeep clean, forget this nightmare, pretend it had never happened. I tried to focus on the routine, on the mundane aspects of my life. A shower, food, sleep. That was all I needed. I opened the Jeep door, the familiar click sounding impossibly loud in the quiet garage. As I stepped out, my foot brushed against something lying on the concrete. I looked down. It was a small, smooth stone, about the size of my thumb. It was black, completely featureless, and felt cold to the touch. Nothing unusual about a stone except that it lay directly beneath the passenger door, in the exact spot where the entity had been ripped away from the Jeep. And then I noticed the mark on its surface. It was not etched or carved, but seemed to be a natural inclusion in the stone itself. A single, precise line of pure white. running straight through the center of the dark pebble. A thin, perfectly straight line. It resonated with the memory of the flattened circle around my tent. Another precise, unnatural mark. This was a message, a confirmation. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, a weight that threatened to pull me down. This was not a random occurrence. The entity had left something behind, a token, a warning. My escape felt less like freedom and more like a temporary reprieve. The image of the line on the stone, simple yet utterly menacing, burned itself into my mind. I picked up the stone, my fingers tingling with an odd sensation, then quickly put it in my pocket. I grabbed my backpack from the Jeep and slammed the door, the sound sharp and final. I needed to get upstairs, to the perceived safety of my apartment. I walked quickly through the garage, my steps echoing unnervingly. The elevator ride felt interminable, each floor number a slow crawl upward. When I finally reached my floor, I hurried down the hallway, fumbling for my keys. The apartment door, a solid oak barrier, seemed to offer the ultimate protection. I inserted the key, turned the lock, and pushed the door open. The familiar sense of my home, the quiet order, were a desperate comfort. I stepped inside, closing the door quickly behind me, twisting the deadbolt with a desperate, hopeful click. I was safe. I was home. I leaned against the door, my eyes closed, letting out a long, shuddering breath. The air in my apartment felt warm, still, normal. The silence was not the oppressive quiet of the woods, but the reassuring hum of my own space. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my legs outstretched, exhausted, relieved. Then my eyes opened. My gaze fell upon the floor immediately in front of the door. There, etched into the welcome mat, a thin, stark line. It was drawn in something dark and oily, a substance I did not recognize. The line stretched from one edge of the mat to the other, a perfect, unwavering barrier directly in front of my door. It was a twin to the line on the black stone, a chilling echo of the flattened circle in the meadow. It was here. It had been here. It had crossed every boundary, breached every defense. The relief drained from my body, leaving behind a cold, hollow terror that settled deep in my core. This was not over. This was not over. This was not a one-time encounter, a temporary haunting. This was personal. It had found me. It knew where I lived. The line on the welcome mat was not just a mark. It was a declaration. It was a promise that the siege had just begun, and there was no escape. I was trapped, not in a tent in the wilderness, but in my own home, forever marked. The terror was not outside. It was already inside,